The morning was like any other in the small town of Oak Ridge, Connecticut. Detective Sarah Miller watched as rain tapped against the window of her office, creating rivulets that distorted the view of the tree-lined street below. Her coffee had grown cold, forgotten amid the pile of case files that demanded her attention. 20 years on the force, and she still felt the weight of each unsolved case like stones in her pockets. The framed photo on her desk, showing her younger self alongside her father, also a detective, seemed to watch her with quiet expectation. The Miller legacy of solving the unsolvable was both her pride and her burden. She rubbed her tired eyes, having stayed up late reviewing cold case files again. Her current obsession was the Riverbank Strangler from the 1980s, 3 unsolved murders that had haunted the department for decades. The case had been officially closed when Harold Winters was convicted, but something about it had always bothered her father. Before he died 5 years ago, he'd mentioned inconsistencies that never sat right with him. Her phone rang, shattering the quiet. Detective Jim Ramirez, her partner of 7 years, was on the line. "Sarah, we've got a body at Riverside Park. Young female, strangled. You're going to want to see this one." Something in his voice made her sit up straighter. "What is it, Jim?" "The scene. It's eerily similar to those old Riverbank cases, the ones your dad worked on." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she grabbed her coat. "I'm on my way." By the time Sarah arrived, forensics had already set up a perimeter. Yellow tape cordoned off a section near the footpath that wound through the park's eastern edge. The sky had darkened, and technicians had set up portable lights that cast harsh shadows across the scene. Sarah ducked under the tape, nodding to the officer standing guard. Rain had begun to fall again, a light drizzle that threatened to wash away evidence. The victim was a young woman in her early 20s, blonde hair splayed across the wet ground like spilled paint. She wore jeans and a blue university sweatshirt, now muddied and torn at one sleeve. No ID, no phone, nothing to immediately tell them who she was. Just a crumpled note in her coat pocket with a single phone number written on it. Her neck bore the unmistakable bruising pattern of manual strangulation. Sarah felt an uncomfortable sense of déjà vu. The positioning, the location near water, the method of killing. It all echoed the old case files she'd been reviewing just that morning. "How long?" Sarah asked, kneeling beside the body, careful not to disturb the scene. Dr. Patel, the medical examiner, a petite woman with gray-streaked hair who had seen more death than most, looked up from her preliminary examination. She'd been with the department nearly as long as Sarah. "Based on body temperature and lividity, she's been dead for approximately 12 hours, she said, her voice clinical, but not without compassion. "Cause of death appears to be strangulation, but I'll confirm during the autopsy. There are defensive wounds on her hands, suggesting she fought back. Skin beneath her fingernails. Likely got a piece of her attacker." Sarah leaned closer. "Anything else?" "No obvious signs of sexual assault, but I'll know more after the full examination. There's this, though." Dr. Patel gently turned the victim's head, revealing a small blue flower placed behind her ear. It was deliberately placed post-mortem. Sarah's breath caught. The blue flower, a forget-me-not, was a signature detail from the Riverbank cases that had never been released to the public. Her father had mentioned it in his private notes, which she'd inherited after his death. Sarah stood, studying the scene with methodical precision. The victim lay near a cluster of trees, partially hidden from the main path. Not a crime of opportunity. The killer had chosen this spot deliberately for privacy. "Any witnesses?" she asked Ramirez, who was interviewing a park maintenance worker nearby. "None so far. A jogger found her this morning around 6 a.m. Guy runs the same route every day. He's pretty shaken up." Ramirez gestured to a pale-faced man sitting on a bench about 50 yards away, wrapped in a shock blanket despite the mild temperature. "Officer Chen is taking his statement, but he didn't see anything suspicious besides the body." "What about security cameras?" "Nothing that covers this specific area. There's one at the park entrance, but it's been broken for weeks. Budget cuts." Ramirez's frustration was evident. A young officer approached, notepad in hand. "Detective Miller, we've identified the victim. Her name is Emily Carter, 23, a graduate student at Connecticut State University. Biochemistry department. Her roommate reported her missing last night when she didn't come home from a late lab session. Sarah looked back at the body, at Emily. Young lives cut short always struck her hardest. This one felt particularly cruel. A promising student with her future ahead of her. What about the number in her pocket? We're tracing it now. Preliminary check shows it's registered to someone at the university. Get me everything you can on Emily Carter. Social media, phone records, credit card statements. I want to know who she talked to in the last 48 hours, where she went, what she was working on. Already on it, the officer replied. Sarah turned back to the scene, noticing something partially concealed by fallen leaves near the victim's hand. She carefully brushed them aside, revealing a small USB drive. "Bag this," she instructed a nearby evidence technician. "Priority processing." Back at the station, Sarah pinned Emily's photo to the incident board. Young, smiling, full of life. A stark contrast to how Sarah had found her. The digital record showed Emily Carter had been a scholarship student with a near-perfect GPA, studying biochemistry according to her university profile. No criminal record, not even a parking ticket. The photo had been taken from her LinkedIn profile, where she described herself as passionate about using genetic science to unlock historical mysteries. The forensics team had rushed the USB drive found at the scene. It contained research papers on forensic DNA analysis and a password-protected file they were still trying to crack. The phone number from her pocket belonged to a Professor Alan Mercer, Ramirez reported, hanging up his desk phone. "He's her academic advisor in the biochemistry department. Been at the university for 15 years, highly respected in his field. He's on his way in now." Professor Mercer arrived 30 minutes later. Tall and distinguished with salt and pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses, he carried himself with the confident bearing of academia. But today, his hands trembled slightly as he sat across from Sarah in the interview room. When questioned, he expressed shock and claimed he had no idea why Emily would have specifically carried his number. "She was brilliant," he said, his voice shaking. "One of the most promising students I've ever had. We were working on a research project together that could have revolutionized certain aspects of forensic science. She was, dedicated doesn't even begin to describe it." "What kind of research?" Sarah asked, watching his face carefully. Mercer leaned forward, his academic enthusiasm momentarily overriding his distress. "DNA sequencing techniques, particularly from degraded or contaminated samples. Emily was focused on improving methods for extracting DNA from decades-old evidence. She developed a new protocol that could potentially retrieve usable genetic material from samples previously considered too degraded for analysis." Sarah made a note of this, feeling a prickle of interest. "That sounds like work that might be relevant to cold cases." "Exactly," Mercer nodded. "That was her passion. She believed that many unsolved cases from the pre-DNA era could be resolved with today's technology, especially with her improvements." He paused. She was particularly interested in cases from the 1980s, before DNA was routinely used in criminal investigations. Sarah's pen paused over her notepad. Did she ever mention specific cases she was interested in? Mercer hesitated. "Not to me, no, but she was determined. When Emily set her mind to something." "When did you last see her?" 2 days ago, during our regular project meeting. She seemed distracted. I asked if something was wrong, but she brushed it off. Said she was close to a breakthrough, but needed to verify something first." He rubbed his temples. "I should have pressed harder, should have asked more questions." "Did she mention meeting anyone, or going somewhere after hours?" "No, but—" Mercer paused. "She did ask about access to the university's cold storage facility where older biological samples are kept. For teaching purposes, you understand. I told her she'd need special permission." By evening, the team had assembled a more complete picture of Emily's final days. Her phone records showed frequent calls to Professor Mercer and a number associated with a local lab called GeneTech. Her credit card had been used at a coffee shop near the university library the afternoon before her death, and at a gas station about a mile from where her body was found. The tech team had managed to access Emily's laptop, revealing a meticulous digital filing system with folders for her coursework, research, and personal projects. One password-protected folder labeled Riverbank Revisited contained newspaper clippings about the Riverbank Strangler case from the 1980s, court transcripts from Harold Winter's trial, and notes about inconsistencies in the evidence that had convicted him. Her internet search history showed multiple searches about DNA cold cases, something called familial DNA matching, and several visits to the state prison system's online archives. She had also accessed obituaries for Harold Winters and, curiously, for Robert Mercer, Professor Mercer's father, who had died 3 years earlier after a distinguished career as a forensic technician with the state crime lab. "Look at this," Ramirez said, pointing to Emily's calendar. She had an appointment at GeneTech yesterday at 4 p.m., and then another meeting scheduled for 11 p.m., marked only with the initials VR. "That's well after business hours," Sarah observed, "and only a few hours before her estimated time of death." Emily's final text message sent to her roommate at 10:42 p.m. read simply, "Don't wait up. I think I finally have proof." Day one ended with more questions than answers. Sarah went home to her empty apartment, spreading the case files across her dining table. Sleep eluded her as she pored over Emily's research and the old Riverbank Strangler case notes from her father's personal files. There was a connection here. She could feel it. In the morning light of the second day, armed with coffee and determination, Sarah visited GeneTech. Located in a sleek modern building on the outskirts of town, the private laboratory specialized in advanced genetic testing services for medical and research institutions. The reception area was all chrome and glass with a DNA double helix sculpture rotating slowly in the center of the room. The receptionist, a young man with a polished smile, confirmed that Emily had been there the day before her death, meeting with Dr. Victor Rhodes, the lab's director. "Yes, Ms. Carter had an appointment at 4 p.m. She was here for about an hour," he said, checking the digital visitor log. "She's been here several times in the past month, always to see Dr. Rhodes." "Did she seem distressed or anxious yesterday?" Sarah asked. The receptionist considered this. Not when she arrived, but when she left. She seemed intense, determined, like someone who had just made an important decision. Dr. Rhodes kept them waiting for 15 minutes before his assistant finally ushered them into his office. He was a tall man with a perpetually furrowed brow and the confident demeanor of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in the room. His office was meticulously organized, with awards and diplomas covering one wall and a large model of a DNA strand rotating on his desk. "Detective Miller," he greeted her, not rising from his chair. "I understand you're investigating Emily Carter's death. A tragedy. She was a gifted scientist." "You saw her yesterday," Sarah stated. "Can you tell me about that meeting?" Rhodes tapped his fingers on his desk. "Emily approached me about using our equipment for a personal project. We have a partnership with the university for certain specialized testing their facilities can't accommodate." "And did you allow her to use your equipment?" "Absolutely not," Rhodes said firmly. "We have strict protocols. I told her we couldn't allow unauthorized use of our facilities, especially for something unrelated to her official research." "Did she say what this personal project was?" "Something about a cold case. I assumed it was academic research, but she was evasive when I pressed for details." He shrugged. "Students often get carried away with pet projects. I suggested she go through proper channels if she wanted access." Sarah studied him. "How well did you know Emily?" "Professionally only. I guest lecture at the university occasionally. I recognized her potential early on and have followed her work. In fact, I had offered her a position here after graduation." He paused. "A mind like hers doesn't come along often." Sarah jotted down notes, not entirely satisfied with his answers. "Did she mention meeting anyone else yesterday? Or having information she was excited about?" "No," Rhodes said too quickly. "Our meeting was brief and ended with her disappointment about the equipment access." As Sarah and Ramirez were leaving, a young lab technician with nervous eyes caught up with them in the hallway, glancing over her shoulder. "Excuse me, detective, I overheard about Emily." The woman, whose ID badge identified her as Mia Chen, hesitated. "Emily was here after hours," she finally whispered. "I was working late on my own project in Lab B. I saw her using the sequencing equipment around midnight. Dr. Rhodes was with her. They were arguing." "About what?" Sarah asked quietly. I couldn't hear everything, but Emily was saying something about the public deserves to know the truth, and Rhodes was telling her to consider the consequences and some things are better left buried. When they noticed me, they stopped talking. Mia looked down. I shouldn't be telling you this. Dr. Rhodes is not someone you want as an enemy. You're doing the right thing, Sarah assured her. Did you see what they were analyzing? Some kind of old DNA sample. Emily had it in a specialized container, the kind used for degraded specimens. When confronted with this information back in his office, Dr. Rhodes's composed facade cracked slightly. After several denials, he finally admitted that Emily had convinced him to help her analyze a DNA sample after hours. She was persuasive, he said reluctantly. She had evidence of some financial irregularities in our government contracts that would have been embarrassing if made public. Nothing illegal, but the optics would have been problematic. So she blackmailed you, Sarah stated flatly. Rhodes winced. I prefer to think of it as leveraging. She was desperate to use our new XGS 9000 sequencer. It's the only one in the state that could handle what she was trying to do with degraded DNA. What was the sample? Sarah demanded. Rhodes spread his hands. She wouldn't say exactly, just that it was important. Something about justice for someone. I helped her run it, but I never saw the full results. She took the data and left around 1 a.m. She was excited, said something had been confirmed that changed everything. Back at the station that afternoon, Sarah received a call from Dr. Patel. Detective, I found something unusual during the autopsy. Emily Carter had a small tattoo behind her left ear, relatively new, still slightly raised. It's a series of numbers and letters, RB 8302. RB, Sarah repeated. Riverbank and 8302? Could that be a case number or date? February 1983? Could be. There's something else. The blue flower placed behind her ear? It's a specific variety of forget-me-not that only blooms in late spring. Someone would have had to preserve it or grow it indoors this time of year. After hanging up, Sarah received more news. The forensics team had found traces of DNA under Emily's fingernails, evidence from her struggle with her killer. They had expedited the analysis, and by nightfall, they had a match in the system. It can't be right, the lab technician said, handing her the report with a confused expression. I've never seen anything like this. The DNA belonged to Harold Winters, who had been convicted of 3 similar murders in the 1980s, including the Riverbank Strangler cases. The only problem? Harold Winters had died in prison in 1997, over 25 years ago. This doesn't make sense, Sarah muttered, staring at the report. Could this be a lab error? Contamination? We ran it 3 times, the lab technician assured her, clearly unsettled. It's a definitive match to Winters' profile in the database. 99.97% probability. Could someone have planted Winters' DNA somehow? Ramirez suggested. If they had access to old evidence. That's highly improbable, the technician replied. DNA degrades over time. Even preserved samples from the 80s would be significantly degraded by now. Sarah spent the night in the department's archives, digging through the dusty boxes containing the original case files on Harold Winters. The Riverbank Strangler had terrorized Oak Ridge for 18 months in 1982-83. 3 young women had been found strangled near bodies of water, each with a forget-me-not flower placed behind her ear. The case had nearly destroyed her father, then a young detective determined to catch the killer. Winters had been arrested after the 3rd murder when a witness claimed to have seen him near the scene. Forensic evidence, then limited to blood typing and hair analysis, had tied him to the crimes. He had maintained his innocence until his death from a prison yard stabbing in 1997. As Sarah read through her father's meticulous notes, something caught her eye. In the margins of one report, he had written, "Hair evidence conclusive? Ask RM about microscopy results." And later, RM confirmed match to W, case closed. RM Robert Mercer, the lab technician who had processed the key forensic evidence, Professor Alan Mercer's father. His victims had been young women, strangled just like Emily, but how could a man dead for decades have killed again? Unless... Sarah pulled out Emily's research notes from the evidence box. Among the papers was a journal article about chimeric DNA and cases of forensic misidentification. Emily had highlighted several passages about how certain medical conditions or treatments could result in a person carrying two distinct DNA profiles. Had Emily discovered something about the original Winters case? Something someone would kill to keep buried? On the morning of the third day, Sarah returned to Emily's apartment, a modest two-bedroom in a complex largely populated by students. The building had seen better days, with peeling paint in the hallways and flickering fluorescent lights. But Emily's apartment was neat and organized. Her roommate, Aisha Williams, let them in, still red-eyed from crying. Family photos covered the refrigerator, textbooks were stacked on every surface, and a corkboard was covered with post-it notes about lab schedules and research deadlines. A small potted forget-me-not plant sat on the windowsill. "That's unusual to grow indoors," Sarah commented, nodding toward the plant. Aisha wiped her eyes. Emily started growing them a few months ago, said they had special meaning to her family. Was Emily working on anything unusual recently? Something outside her normal studies? Sarah asked, carefully examining the corkboard. The roommate hesitated, twisting a tissue between her fingers. She was obsessed with this old murder case. At first I thought it was just for a paper or something, but it became really personal for her. Personal how? Her aunt was killed in the 80s, one of Harold Winters' victims, the third one, Lisa Carter. Emily never knew her, obviously, but her mom talked about Lisa all the time growing up. Aisha's voice dropped. Emily believed the police got it wrong back then. She was trying to prove it. Did she say why she thought that? Her grandfather, her mom's dad, always insisted Winters was innocent. He worked as a janitor at the courthouse during the trial and claimed he overheard something that made him doubt the conviction. He died still believing it. Aisha hesitated. Emily found some of her aunt's belongings in her mom's attic last summer. Journals, photographs, even an old hairbrush. That's when she really got serious about the research. "A hairbrush?" Sarah asked sharply. "With hair still in it?" Aisha nodded. "Emily was so excited about it. Said it might be the key to everything." This was the breakthrough Sarah needed. With Aisha's permission, she examined Emily's bedroom, finding a locked metal box under her bed. Inside were newspaper clippings about the original murders, photocopies of police reports that should have been confidential, and a sealed evidence bag containing what appeared to be an old wooden hairbrush with strands of dark hair still tangled in its bristles. A handwritten note was taped to the bag. Aunt Lisa's DNA sample obtained 315. Sarah returned to the university and tracked down Emily's research files, both physical and digital. The tech team had finally cracked the password on the protected file from the USB drive. Innocent Man, 1983. Among the documents was a family tree and a set of DNA profiles labeled LC. Likely Lisa Carter, HW, Harold Winters, and unknown male, 1983. Emily had been using familial DNA matching to investigate her aunt's murder, believing that Harold Winters had been wrongfully convicted. One document particularly stood out. A scanned letter from a retired nurse who had worked at Oak Ridge General Hospital in the early 1980s. The letter mentioned a patient named Robert Mercer, who had received regular blood transfusions as part of his treatment for a rare blood disorder. The transfusions had come from his brother, Edward Mercer. Sarah called Dr. Patel. Those DNA results from under Emily's fingernails. Could they belong to a relative of Harold Winters? Someone sharing enough genetic markers to create a close match? It's possible, Dr. Patel admitted, especially with older testing methods and database entries from that era. They weren't nearly as precise as what we use today. But there's something else you should know. I found traces of anti-rejection medication in Emily's attacker's DNA, like someone who's had an organ transplant or regular blood transfusions. It can create a condition called chimerism, where a person carries two distinct DNA profiles. In forensic contexts, it's caused headaches in a few famous cases. Sarah thought about Robert Mercer's blood disorder and his brother's transfusions. Can you run a more detailed analysis? Look specifically at distinguishing between primary and secondary DNA profiles? I'll need a comparison sample for the secondary profile. It's complicated work. I'll get you one, Sarah promised. The new analysis, completed by mid-afternoon, revealed that the DNA under Emily's fingernails belonged to someone who carried two distinct genetic profiles, their own, and one closely related to Harold Winters, a son or brother sharing approximately 50% of his genetic markers. Does that have to do with anything? Emily figured it out, didn't she? It wasn't Harold Winters who killed those women in the 80s. It was your father. And he framed Winters for it. You don't understand, Mercer said, his voice barely above a whisper. My father was protecting me. Sarah's blood ran cold. It was you? I was young. I made mistakes. My father found out and he fixed it. He made the evidence point to Winters. No one questioned it because Winters had a record. And then it was over. Until Emily started digging, Sarah said. She discovered that the DNA wasn't a perfect match to Winters. She suspected familial DNA was involved. She came to you for help, not knowing you were connected. She was going to expose everything, Mercer said, his eyes haunted. My whole life would be destroyed. I tried to reason with her, to explain that it was all in the past, but she wouldn't listen. So you killed her, just like you killed her aunt and those other women decades ago. Mercer lunged for his desk drawer, but Sarah was faster. She drew her weapon. Don't. As they led Mercer away in handcuffs, Sarah thought about the irony. The very science that Emily had been studying, extracting DNA from degraded samples and familial matching, had finally brought justice for her aunt and herself. The case had indeed been solved in 3 days, but the truth had taken decades to emerge, buried beneath layers of deception and the protectiveness of a father who had compromised everything to save his son. In the end, it wasn't a ghost that had committed the crime. It was a monster hiding in plain sight, whose past had finally caught up with him thanks to the persistence of a young woman who refused to accept that the case was closed. Sarah sat at her desk that evening, adding the final notes to the case file. The rain had stopped, and weak sunlight filtered through the window. Justice had been served, but it felt hollow. Emily Carter would never see the vindication of her work. As Sarah closed the file, her phone rang again. Another body had been found. Another family would soon be grieving. Another puzzle to solve. She sighed, grabbed her coat, and headed back out into the world, where more secrets waited to be uncovered. But for now, at least, Emily could rest in peace, having accomplished what she had set out to do, even if she hadn't lived to see it. The truth had finally come to light, decades after it had been buried, proving that some secrets, no matter how well hidden, cannot stay buried forever. DNA doesn't lie. And sometimes it tells stories from beyond the grave.